This video topic was recommended by one of my viewers. You should do that too. I'm very tired. I'm sick again, as you can probably hear. My apologies for that. In my last video, I tried to explore the values held by the Imperial House of the Fire Nation in a way that granted their humanity. They belong to one of the best told stories in television history after all. Shouldn't we at least try to understand them to be well written? So, assuming we want to read the best possible story into our understanding of them, let's try to get to know Ozai a little bit better. I've argued that our understanding of Azula could be enriched by analyzing her cultural context, and the same holds true for Ozai. Ozai is not essentially an abusive father and megalomaniacal supervillain. He's the apex of a political tradition spanning generations that has just about proven that enforced unity, brutally taking power for yourself and denying it to others, makes life more stable and society more prosperous. We would expect him to follow this logic in all parts of his life. For instance, it's not a coincidence or a consequence of convenience that his daughter overtakes Ba Sing Se in a bloodless coup. The fact that it's bloodless means that it's more efficient. The people who survived can serve the conquerors, and the Empire is less likely to incite rebellion if they don't kill too many people. Ozai is not a good person by our standards, but he wouldn't consider our standards to be particularly meaningful. He is a good ruler based on the standards that his family has proven are efficacious based on the ends that they want. Even usurping the throne from Iroh has no value to an antisocial leech with only malevolent intentions. He necessarily takes power for himself because he believes he can do good with it, even if his understanding of good is different than ours. Likewise, in this video, I want to invite you to politely set aside your most basic moral framework. I don't want you to forget your morals. That's important stuff, and we will be using that framework later. But I encourage you to bear in mind that those frameworks are made up and very contingent. And for the character that we're going to try to understand today, that framework might act like more of a cage. Alright? Alright. So, in 1889, Friedrich Wilhelm Nietzsche had a nervous breakdown.
And they took Frederick to the asylum.
Like with most people who had mental health crises in the 19th century, no one knows the exact cause of this event. But sometimes, when a person so brilliant and illuminating is found plunging into the depths, we can't help but wonder if their ideas themselves push them over the edge. The will to power is an idea so terrifying and sublime, Nietzsche eventually gave up on the idea of writing it down. The book we have with that title was published posthumously by his sister, who was a total fascist, by the way. To summarize as best as I can, the will to power is the innate drive to progress, and I'm being intentionally vague with that word. The thing that urges on all forward momentum is the drive to struggle forward to become something more than what you are. Friedrich believed that people should pursue that which makes them suffer. Humans must fearlessly embrace the pain of life, and that will inevitably lead to ecstasy, revelation, apotheosis. In contrast, seeking comfort is a shortcut, a waste of life. One who attacks the insurmountable, pushes their limits, and expresses radical authenticity regardless of the consequences is an ubermensch, or Superman. And the person who seeks the comfortable, placid, unchallenging life is the last man. They take no risks, have no hope, and coast by in a haze of inert ennui. Through these intentional trials, people become something more than what they are. There is no essential human spirit. To be human is to always be becoming something else. My mind is drawing a parallel between the will to power and the theater of cruelty. Artaud's goal was to put actors and audiences through painful trials in order to induce a kind of mystical experience, where inert energy was unbridled, and the ennui of day-to-day survival melted into a dazzling, elevated plane of existence. A touch of death really brings out the fine notes of euphoria in modern life. Artaud once wrote the following on the work of Van Gogh. I will tell you that Van Gogh is a painter because he has reassembled nature, because he has, as it were, perspired it and made it sweat, because he has spurted onto his canvases in heaps, monumental with colors, the centuries-old struggle of elements, the terrible, rudimentary pressure of apostrophes, stripes, commas, and strokes, of which we must admit that, after him, natural appearances are made. I can't pretend that this deranged statement appearing in an essay not 200 words away from an inexplicable description of a vagina cooked in green sauce and a penis of newborn child whipped and beaten to a pulp doesn't make sense to me on a profound level. By the way, that mutilated genital imagery, it's the first sentence in that essay. I wish Artaud could make my thumbnails. Artaud here argues that fiction must not be an escape from reality, but a gateway into it, and the way through that gate is with pain. I think this elucidates Nietzsche's point. When Nietzsche describes the most fundamental drive in humankind, a person becoming more than what they are, he assumes a kind of self-craftsmanship that people exercise over themselves in order to realize a sort of truth that exists beyond cultural concepts of reality, in real reality. The will to power also makes me think of Freud's thoughts on the death drive. By its very nature, happiness can be no more than an episodic phenomenon. Any prolongation of a situation desired by the pleasure principle produces a feeling of lukewarm contentment. We are so constituted that we can gain intense pleasure only from the contrast, and only very little from the condition itself. There is something more important than survival, something that has to do with becoming something else through collision with that which is big, imposing, threatening, even fatal. And so, I appear to have contradicted myself. In my last video, we talked about the sociological context in which the Fire Nation became so authoritarian. The impulse to control a violent country with a unified hand is an act of cowardice. You want to end the violence before the violence ends you. Everything Azula does, I argue, affirms the virtue of strength in a country constantly on the edge of explosive violence. Azula and Ozai are strong so that fewer people have to suffer and die. So we got two opposing thoughts here. People grasp at power with shivering hands to protect themselves. And people crave power, because to become something more than what you are is to realize potential and seek the ultimate boon. So, which one's right? We're gonna answer that question by honing in on Ozai. I can't fully get behind the idea that Ozai is, in some way, cowardly or focused on self-preservation. The more I think about it, the less cowardice I see in Ozai's actions and presentation. The main reason I can't quite see Ozai as cowardly has to do with the way he interacts with and uses his children. Ozai uses his children to advance his reign in a way that doesn't feel protective and feels far from cautious. Ozai uses Azula as his main tool in the outside world, rarely leaving the palace himself, and he grooms Azula for leadership from a very young age. Not only does this indicate a disregard for traditional gender norms, old Fire Nation institutions like the Fire Sages are certainly less diverse, it also shows a commitment to quality and value over age. Passing the throne on to the eldest child of the sovereign is not an inherently good thing. It's the norm because it makes the transfer of power much less bloody if everyone knows who's supposed to take over as early as possible. Remember how easily Zuko slots back into the heir to the throne position in the early half of Season 3? Well, that's sensible. Ozai is glad that his firstborn son has proven his worth and restored his honor. It makes things a lot easier. These feelings are genuine.
I am proud of you, Prince Zuko. I am proud because you and your sister conquered Ba Sing Se. I am proud because when your loyalty was tested by your treacherous uncle, you did the right thing and captured the traitor.
But, throughout most of the story, Azula is the far more effective of the two siblings, and so even though Zuko is older, Ozai sticks with Azula. He sticks with Azula even though Zuko is the far safer option. Do you remember what got Zuko in trouble in the first place? Refusing to fight his father. Ozai burns Zuko on the face, and Zuko doesn't even strike back. Ozai banishes Zuko, and Zuko takes one of the most prolific and accomplished generals with him on the way out, and they don't try to attack Ozai. Zuko is much more docile than Azula, and much more eager to please him. I don't know about you, but I think I'd be the kind of king who keeps Zuko around and sends Azula out in the world to accomplish some ridiculously difficult goal. I'd keep the safe one nearby and the wild card as far away as I possibly could. Speaking of gender norms being disregarded, have you ever noticed that the Fire Nation is the most gender-integrated of the 4 nations in the original series? Well, there's some truth in that. Some of the most egalitarian civilizations in history have been peoples like the Mongols and the Vikings, pillaging, expanding, generally violent folks. Modern Mongols aren't violent. That's just, I'm talking about like Genghis era. Modern Vikings are very much cancelled, though. Isn't there an inherent danger to social egalitarianism that makes it all the more fascinating when it happens bloodlessly? Let's think about the shining pinnacle of cowardice that was slavery in the United States. Around the turn of the 19th century, Haiti experienced a slave rebellion that ended in a horrific massacre of the entire French population of the territory. This terrified a lot of people here in the United States, and it made the prospect of abolition seem unthinkable. Even as slavery began to hurt the economic interests of the northern states, we still had to fight the bloodiest war on our soil in order to stop it. And until this day, it's been unofficial government policy to keep the black population of the US as disempowered and terrified as possible, all in this obsessive fear of retribution for slavery. In contrast, Vikings and Mongols didn't have time to be so cowardly. Expansion is a difficult and time-consuming occupation. You have to be brave enough to allow those who are different from you, and may even have good reason to kill you, to wield power right alongside you. If you won't allow a woman to sail a ship, that ship isn't going anywhere. Likewise, Ozai doesn't hesitate to subvert common sense to achieve loftier goals. He doesn't try to stay safe. He'd rather seize an opportunity. By keeping the ambitious Azula nearby and branding Zuko untouchable, he spurs on Azula's drive even more and tries to cultivate his virtues in Zuko. He makes Azula even more volatile and dangerous. His entire relationship with Azula is a gamble. In the end, Ozai's biggest gamble, the decision that eventually leads to his downfall, is nominally an act of love. He brings Zuko back into the palace and lavishes him with attention and respect, all the things he always withheld from him. And he asks that Zuko sit at his right hand during a war council meeting. He won't even allow the meeting to begin until Zuko gets there. And it's because of this act of love that Zuko knows the information to prevent the Fire Nation from burning the Earth Kingdom to the ground. I already know that some people are going to take issue with me calling this an act of love. Stop typing. I'm acknowledging you, goddammit. If you remember from my last video, paternal love is not the same thing for everyone, and things like class, era, and culture all affect what familial love means and how it is demonstrated. Imagine you're Ozai. You grew up in a society where an appropriate punishment for taking advantage of your brother, who has just lost a son, is for your father to command you to kill your son. Where's the logic in that, Dad? What, you want 2 dead grandchildren? No. When Azulon commands Ozai to kill Zuko, he is expressing his love for Iroh and for Lu-Ten. That's the only reasonable explanation for this punishment. That might seem insane to you, as it does to me, but just remember, love is not some essential entity that exists out there in the nominal world. It manifests based on the priorities and preferences that we develop based on our culture. Azulon does need to show his nation that he values the rightful line of succession by defending Iroh's claim to the throne. But the desire to do this is a kind of love for Iroh. It's a paternal love. Remember, Ozai really is a better heir to the throne in this instance. His children are alive. That really matters in a hereditary monarchy. But the priorities of favoring your first child and offering them the care and the support they need to become a great ruler creates love in a society that values the line of succession as a thing that prevents violence. Azulan expresses a destructive desire in this moment, and that desire comes from a deep sense of who he is and what he believes in. The pillars of his reality demand this act of senseless violence. Likewise, Ozai is almost compelled to banish Zuko, because to teach him respect is to provide for him. It's a way of caring for him, supporting his heir. In a society where violence is seen as the way to protect your people, of course it can also be seen as an expression of love. I think it's interesting to note that Azula never feels threatened by Zuko in the first part of Season 3. Actually, we've never seen her this relaxed. She likes to luxuriate around the palace and make fun of her brother and hang out with her friends. Perhaps she's more or less convinced that the Avatar will show up and Ozai will realize that Zuko didn't kill him, but she also goes out of her way to warn him that his visits to Iroh are too obvious. She tells him at the end of Season 2 that she needs his help to conquer Ba Sing Se, and it seems like this was a genuine olive branch. And is this not also a form of love for her brother? This too is evocative of that whole network of ideas that we started this video with. Ozai loves his children in a way that he hopes will advance them and therefore advance the cause of the Fire Nation's war. I'll borrow a line from my last video. Zuko's understanding of his father's actions as cruel and wrong are extremely modern, and while I hope you're holding on to that moral framework and continue to love Zuko as much as I do, let's not pretend that our framework is the only one that exists. I want to remind you that just because we agree with Zuko doesn't mean that his father's concept of how a royal family should behave is completely twisted. I would argue that much of the way Ozai perpetuates the war could be seen through a similar lens, where things we consider bad could be justified in this Nietzschean worldview, because as much as this hurts to say, war involves some kind of societal advancement. We already spoke of the inherent bravery of egalitarianism, which is why I always bristle at the idea that the United States is the home of the brave. It especially upsets me when the most blindly patriotic of Americans believe in curtailing abortion rights to save life. Like, what happened to give me liberty or give me death? Aren't there more important things than that which meets the most literal definition of life? Whatever, that's a tangent for another video. That other video is actually 3 videos on my channel about The Handmaid's Tale. You should watch them. It seems to me that while the will to power is best applied to individuals, conquest involves a kind of self-movement and conscious self-craftsmanship as well. We know that the Fire Nation saw advancements in the technology of rulership between Sozin and Ozai. Sozin's throne is just a simple dais with a set of carpeted stairs leading up to it. By the time of his son's reign, Azulan is sitting behind a veil of flames in a room of dark, bloody reds. There are no steps. In his presence, you become untouchable. He has to enter from a different part of the palace, one that you don't have access to. Maybe even a celestial plane where the Fire Lord dwells. He's a mysterious, domineering, inhuman force. It also seems that Ozai's reign ushered in technology of the more mundane variety. Flying ships, gondolas, tanks, things that wouldn't have been possible without the conquest. After all, the Mechanist was not a subject of the Fire Nation. He became a collaborator because of the expansion. Ozai creates new things, or creates the ability for new things to be made, in order to destroy. And this ends up being a pretty integral part of his character in the finale. So, quick vibe check. How's your moral framework doing? Good, good. I'm gonna need you to take off one more framework for me, if that's cool. The critical framework that balks at anything too shonen anime-ish. Yeah, I'm gonna need you to just take that one off too. It's only gonna get in the way for this next part. So, in the series finale, Ozai decides to burn down the world and declare himself the Phoenix King. Because the new world will be reborn from the ashes of the old one. Even in context, it's a little too shonen for me. But we're taking this seriously. Stick with me, lads. Calling himself the Phoenix King effectively destroys the role of the Fire Lord and advances him into a new stage of development. He gives up the throne and puts himself in an immensely vulnerable position by being in the front line of this battle. He even single-handedly takes on the Avatar in one-on-one battle. It's a ridiculous act of hubris that a guy as sensible as Ozai never would have taken if not for this tradition of Fire Lords pushing past their perceived limits of power. Intuitively, I feel a sort of connection with these ideas and sentiments, and there are ways in which a society can appropriately follow these principles, pushing past what is strictly needed for survival, and using the safety of a community to give humanity the tools to think new thoughts, create wonders, and make happiness. Those are things that a society should do. Those are things that a government should do. So that's why the Fire Nation is the greatest country to ever be conceived of, ever. It's literally perfect. Real quick, grab your moral framework. Just put it back on. Yeah. You're gonna need it for this next part, because we're about to talk about why the Fire Nation is fucking bad at all this. Yeah, I've been lying to you. The Fire Nation is doing a bad job. Yes, a society with the ambition of the Fire Nation does appeal to me, but the problem is a classic one. The ambition is saved for the utopians sitting around in war rooms telling other people to die for your stupid project. In fact, it is completely inaccurate to call the Fire Nation ambitious. A nation is composed of people, not just an administration. And the way the administration of the Fire Nation cultivates the kind of people it needs to achieve its goals is to shackle them to stifling enforced societal norms that prevent personal growth beyond a person's ability to recite a national oath. The headband gets a lot of shit for being inspired by Footloose, but it gives us a good glimpse into the actual world being created by these ubermensch in Ozai's palace. Kids need to go to school in the Fire Nation. Hey, that sounds like a societal advancement. But if they misbehave, including dancing to music, they can just be sent to a coal mine. They aren't being encouraged to tackle obstacles to their own personal goals to achieve happiness. They're being molded into fodder who can advance the project of rich fucks who want to gain power over other people so they can turn them into fodder too. In the end, Ozai would be a huge disappointment to Nietzsche. Thus Spoke Zarathustra is about a great man who develops into a state of near perfection by living in isolation from the rest of the world. But he grows weary of his solitude and decides to share his wisdom with the rest of the people. He gains disciples and teaches them to create their own meaning and values. Zarathustra promotes a kind of moralist anarchism. The belief is that people don't need a strict set of laws to control their every behavior. Every human being should be responsible for crafting their own system of values and adhering to them.
I cannot believe we are so poorly made as that. Incapable of surviving in the state to which we were born. Grown so used to the yoke that there can be no progress without it.
In the end, Zarathustra leaves his disciples multiple times because he decides that he can't lead them. He's not a god. God is dead. Didn't you know? What fascinates me about this topic is that I still don't understand why Ozai wants the things he wants. There is a Viking somewhere in Ozai's moral code. I think he wants to die in battle and better himself by conquering the rest of the world and subjugating them to his will. I believe that he has internalized the ideas of his ancestors who wanted to create peace through unity, and that naturally developed into a personal sense that expanding the empire is to become something greater than he is now. But a truly brave person takes that capacity for violence and subjugation and turns it inward. They learn how to cultivate themselves, and because they are a human being, such a person necessarily wants other human beings to be able to pursue this kind of profound self-actualization too. They don't strip anyone under their control of the tools needed for self-reflection the way Ozai does. It's so tragic to me that Ozai's only acts of love that we ever get to see are when he exposes Zuko to immense transformational suffering. When he banishes Zuko, he does make him something greater than what he was before, and suffering was his teacher. This horrible act of cruelty is all the love Ozai can muster for a child he made. If you can't enjoy the simple pleasure of caring for your own child and getting to know them on their own terms, if that's not a transformational experience for you, I don't think conquest is going to be either. Ozai is a broken person caught in a fatalistic loop of diverted self-actualization where no real progress can be made and no genuine connection truly felt. If you think that Ozai is a cartoony villain, I totally get that. It does sort of seem like the human being inside him liquidated into this homogeneous, destructive slop. But in a way, there is truth in that too. Ozai is not an ubermensch. Zuko is.
This video is brought to you by me. You're welcome. I think about stories a lot. Almost constantly. I'm not sure where I am right now. Point is, if you're writing a story and you need some help, you can hire me. I consult on screenplays, write serialized fiction, and yes, I write scripts for YouTube professionally. That's right, you're looking at a pro. Don't check my sub count. You can go to my website to check out my portfolio, read my reviews, look at my prices, and reach out for a chat about how I can help with your project.